There seem to be a lot of questions about what Jesus actually looked like. If you were to show a random person an image of a long-haired white man with a beard, chances are they'd say, "That's Jesus." Even many Christians would agree that the image represents Jesus to them. Most modern art, films, and media portray him that way. If you Google, "What did Jesus look like?" the majority of the results will match that familiar face. And it's no surprise that many of the paintings we have of him come from the Renaissance era, where legendary artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo depicted Jesus as a Caucasian man, resembling a typical European philosopher or scholar of that time. These artists weren't necessarily trying to be historically accurate. They were aiming to connect with the people of their day through culturally familiar imagery. The goal was to inspire and elevate the divine using the artistic norms of the time, not to document facts. Interestingly, some communities, particularly within Black culture, believe that Jesus was a man of color, possibly black or, at the very least, deeply brown-skinned.
Jesus belongs to Africa as much as he does to Europe and Asia. He was born in that part of the world that touches Africa and Asia and Europe, and Jesus was not a white man like me.
For them, it's not just about representation. It's about reclaiming a truth erased by centuries of Eurocentric portrayal. But what's even more interesting than the debate about Jesus' skin color is the question of his hair. How long was it? Was it really as flowing and shoulder length as so many portrayals suggest? So, what does history, the Bible, and even divine revelation actually say about what Jesus looked like? Did Jesus leave us any clues? And does it really matter? Let's start at the beginning with the first known painting of Jesus Christ. The earliest known image of Jesus dates back to the early 200s AD, about 100 years after his resurrection. This painting was discovered in the catacombs of Priscilla in Rome. It's titled The Good Shepherd. In this image, Jesus is depicted as a youthful, beardless man with short, curly hair, wearing a Roman-style tunic and carrying a sheep on his shoulders. But this wasn't meant to be a literal portrait. It draws from the Greco-Roman shepherd motif, symbolizing care and protection. Early Christians, still under Roman persecution, used imagery that would avoid suspicion. This art was created cautiously, often in secret, designed to teach and inspire believers, many of whom were illiterate, by portraying Jesus as a shepherd tending his flock. By the late 300s AD, we begin to see a transformation. Jesus starts to be depicted with a beard and long hair, often with a halo and more serious, regal expressions. This shift occurred in the Eastern Roman Empire, influenced by Roman imperial portraits and Greek philosopher archetypes. Jesus was no longer portrayed as a gentle shepherd, but as a divine king, the eternal Logos, the Word of God. Once Christianity became legal after the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, artists were free to openly depict Jesus. The imagery shifted to emphasize his divine authority. Long hair, a beard, and majestic posture became the standard symbols of his divinity. In Byzantine art, Jesus' appearance became heavily stylized. These depictions standardized his image: long hair, a beard, symmetrical features, and a glowing halo. But these icons weren't trying to be literal. They aimed to show his divine nature, not his earthly form. His face became symbolic, meant to stir reverence, not serve as a historical ID photo. As Christianity spread across Europe, the image of Jesus continued to shift. By medieval times, he was regularly shown with light skin, soft facial features, and light brown or even blonde hair. Why? Because artists painted what they knew, the people around them. They reflected their own ideals of beauty and nobility, rather than the ethnic or historical reality of a first-century Jewish man from Galilee. Fast forward to the Renaissance, and artists like Da Vinci and Michelangelo redefined the look of Jesus with anatomical precision and classical elegance. Symmetry, graceful posture, peaceful expression. They weren't trying to paint history. They were trying to paint divinity made beautiful, often using local models from Florence or Rome. This was Jesus reimagined through the lens of ideal human perfection. So, why the long hair and beard? This image likely stuck for several reasons. Continuity from earlier Byzantine icons. Influence from the philosopher archetype in Roman and Greek culture. Wise men had beards. Descriptions from apocryphal or later Christian texts, like the mysterious Letter of Lentulus. The Letter of Lentulus is a supposed first-person description of Jesus, allegedly written by Publius Lentulus, a Roman official claimed to have lived before Pontius Pilate. In the letter, Jesus is described in poetic, noble terms, tall, hazel-haired, serene, with flowing hair parted in the middle. But here's the twist. This letter is a forgery, because for one, there's no historical record of a governor named Lentulus. It doesn't appear in any known ancient texts until the 13th or 14th century, and the other thing is the writing style is medieval Latin, not ancient Roman. But still, the letter deeply influenced the Western imagination. But what does the letter actually say? Here's a paraphrased version of the most commonly cited translation. There appeared in these days a man of great virtue, named Jesus Christ, who lives among the people. He is of tall stature, well-formed, and has a serene and dignified face. His hair is the color of ripe hazelnut, smooth and flowing, parted in the middle, falling to his shoulders. His forehead is smooth and serene, his face without wrinkle or blemish, slightly ruddy. His eyes are clear and commanding. His beard is full and well-formed, of the same color as his hair. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Even though it was fabricated, the letter of Lentulus helped standardize the Jesus look. Tall, peaceful, noble, long hair, flowing beard. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, and many more likely drew inspiration from this imagery. Whether consciously or not, it became so widely accepted, it started to feel real, even though it was entirely fictional. So what did ancient Israelites really look like? According to many archaeologists and anthropologists, based on skeletal remains, cultural context, and regional genetics, they were likely people with olive to medium brown skin, dark brown or black hair, typically wavy or curly, brown almond-shaped eyes, and prominent facial features such as strong noses and well-defined bone structures. But interestingly, the Bible itself doesn't completely align with this single description. In fact, it paints a much more nuanced and diverse picture of how the ancient people of Israel may have looked. And then, on the other side of the spectrum, we meet Esau and Jacob in Genesis 25:25. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak, so they called his name Esau. That's a description you don't forget. Esau was likely ruddy, perhaps with reddish hair or skin, and unusually hairy. His twin brother Jacob, later named Israel, likely looked quite different, even though they were born of the same parents. It's significant, because at this point, Israel is still just one man, and his twin brother already demonstrates a strikingly different physical appearance. Later, David is described similarly. In 1 Samuel 16:12, it says, "He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features." The Hebrew word used for David is ruddy, admoni, again suggesting a reddish tone, either in his skin or hair, setting him apart from the crowd. In the Song of Songs, there's a striking verse, "I am dark but lovely. Do not stare at me because I am dark, because the sun has darkened me." This poetic line suggests sun-darkened skin, deep enough to be noticeable, but beautiful nonetheless. Then there's Lamentations, where the suffering of the people is described so vividly. Now their appearance is blacker than soot. They are not recognized in the streets. The image here is one of intense darkness, whether metaphorical or literal. It reinforces the idea that some Israelite had very dark-toned skin, dark enough to be unrecognizable in distress. This all shows something important. The ancient Israelites weren't a monolith in appearance. Some had deeper tones like anyone living under the Middle Eastern sun. Others, like Esau and David, may have had lighter or redder complexions, possibly even red hair. That diversity is further suggested in Genesis 42:8, when Joseph's own brothers don't recognize him in Egypt. While his Egyptian clothing and shaved appearance likely played a part, the implication is also that Israelites and Egyptians didn't look so wildly different that someone would immediately stand out. We see the same theme with Moses. In Exodus 2:19, when he rescues the daughters of Midian, they tell their father, "An Egyptian rescued us." Moses had passed as an Egyptian, another clear indication that Israelites shared visual similarities with their Egyptian neighbors. The overall picture is one of ethnic complexity and natural variation, far from the uniform portrayals seen in much of Western art. This brings us to one of the most intriguing modern efforts to uncover what Jesus might have actually looked like. In 2001, British forensic anthropologist Richard Neve worked with a team of experts for the BBC documentary Son of God, where they used forensic techniques to reconstruct the face of a typical Jewish man from 1st century Galilee. They studied 3 Semitic skulls from the region, used computerized tomography to analyze the skull structure and thickness, and then reconstructed the facial muscles and skin. The final model they produced showed a man with a broad face, a large nose, dark olive-toned skin, Short curly hair and a beard, a face much more consistent with the Middle Eastern populations of Jesus' time than the familiar light-skinned, long-haired image found in many churches and paintings. Not only this, but also apparently some believe Jesus has left a clue for us to show who he looked like, as depicted in the Passion of Christ. The so-called the Shroud of Turin remains one of the most fascinating and hotly debated artifacts linked to Jesus' physical appearance. This 14-foot-long linen cloth bears the faint image of a man who appears to have suffered the brutal injuries of crucifixion, leading many to believe it could be the burial shroud mentioned in the Gospels, specifically in John 20 verse 6 through 7. The image itself is hauntingly detailed. A man with shoulder-length hair, a beard, and mustache, wounds visible on his wrists, feet, and side, consistent with crucifixion, bloodstains on the scalp that suggest a crown of thorns, and marks across his back likely caused by scourging. Strangely, the image becomes much clearer when viewed as a photographic negative, a discovery made in 1898 that added even more mystery to its origin. Over the decades, the shroud has been the subject of intense scientific scrutiny. Some findings support its authenticity. Pollen grains on the cloth match those found around Jerusalem. The bloodstains are confirmed to be human and appear consistent with real bleeding, and the image itself is not painted. There are no pigments in key areas, and the coloration is limited to the surface fibers, but skepticism runs deep. In 1988, radiocarbon testing dated the cloth to between 1260 and 1390 AD, suggesting a medieval origin. Critics of this dating argue the tested area may have come from a later repair, contaminating the results. Adding to the mystery is the lack of any clear historical reference to the shroud before the 14th century. Research hasn't stopped there. In 2017, a study questioned the blood patterns on the shroud, suggesting they may not align with how blood would naturally flow from a real body, raising the possibility of staging. However, other researchers have challenged earlier radiocarbon results, pointing to possible contamination or overlooked factors. As recently as 2022, new imaging technologies and anatomical studies further examined the shroud's figure and positioning, lending credibility to its lifelike proportions, but still falling short of proving it definitively genuine. If the shroud is indeed authentic, it portrays a man of about 5 feet 11 inches, taller than the average first-century Jewish male, with strong Semitic features, long hair, a beard, and a remarkably serene expression despite his evident suffering. Whether real or not, the image on the shroud has profoundly influenced how Jesus has been portrayed in Western art, especially the now iconic long hair and beard that dominate modern depictions. So, when you piece all of this together, the archaeological findings, the biblical descriptions, and modern reconstructions, you begin to see that the people of ancient Israel were far from uniform in appearance. Some were dark-skinned, sun-darkened from labor and life under the Middle Eastern sun. Others, like Esau or David, may have had lighter complexions, ruddy skin, or even red hair. The Bible itself tells a story of visual variety, of brothers who didn't look alike, of people who could pass for Egyptians, of shepherd kings who stood out because of their appearance. That means Jesus, as a man born into this ethnic and genetic mosaic, could very well have had a darker tone, or a lighter, ruddier one, perhaps not unlike some modern Middle Easterners, or even resembling Southern Europeans. The truth is, we don't know for certain, but what we can say is that the range of appearances among ancient Jews leaves room for a much broader and richer image of Jesus. So, we're still left with the question, what did Jesus Christ actually look like? Or at the very least, which portrayal comes closest? That question leads us beyond history books and scientific reconstructions and into something deeper. In John 8:23, when Jesus was asked to prove himself, he said, "You are from below, I am from above. You are of this world, I am not of this world." His words suggest that perhaps it isn't through earthly methods or scientific analysis that we come to truly know him, not even what he looked like. And that's where the story of a remarkable child prodigy enters the picture. Akiane Kramaric, a young girl with no religious upbringing, began having vivid visions and dreams of heaven and Jesus from a very early age. Her family at the time identified as atheist, yet she spoke of divine encounters with unwavering clarity and conviction. At just 8 years old, she painted what she says is the face of Jesus Christ, a portrait that many have found profoundly moving and deeply spiritual. Her art, inspired by these mystical experiences, became an expression of her faith and a glimpse, she says, into the divine. Achion's story is extraordinary, full of wonder, spiritual awakening, and the kind of miraculous beauty that defies explanation. It raises the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the truest image of Jesus isn't found through science or tradition, but through divine revelation to the pure in heart. And perhaps that's the point, because at the end of the day, Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these."